Good evening. Welcome to our last talk for this week. As we come together tonight, the way in which I've tried to frame it is that the MSC spirituality, which is really sort of got on top of all of us, is now going to be explained by someone from Rome, Chaplin. And to introduce the whole thing and to guide us in our reflections tonight, I've asked Narita to come, and she's on the MSC Parish Mission Formation team, which is meant to sort of stir us up so that we can be stirred up with you guys and be better understanding of what's going on in the church today. So I'm going on around in circles, so I'll ask Narita to talk more sensibly.
Sensibly. Good luck with that. So, good evening everyone, and hello to everybody online. First of all, I'll just explain the process that's going to happen tonight. So we've got three about 19-minute videos that we'll play one at a time. We'll have a little break in between and for a little bit of reflection, and we might ask some questions that might prompt that reflection. But we've also been asked, for those of you online, if you'd like to ask any questions, pop them in the comments and we will try and answer those questions. Well, I won't. Paul will. Anyway. So the MSC Parish Mission Formation team, it's a newly formed team. We recognise that we can't just depend on one person to nourish our spirituality. And it's only in the communion with God, and others, that we can grow our spirituality, because spirituality is relational. So heart spirituality is a work in progress. It's not just something that we get at the end of training or the end of a degree. Father Philip spoke to us on Monday, and he spoke about the walls that we build around our hearts to protect us. But those exact walls are what imprison us and prohibit us from the practice of the heart. Father Michael Trainer spoke to us on Wednesday about, and he broke open parts of Matthew's Gospel. God speaks to us in the Gospel stories. And even though you can hear that same story, that same Bible story 100 times, God's message may be different every single time. Unless you didn't listen the first time or the second time, it might be the same message. God has a way of getting through. So in the Gospel stories, there we find a role model in Jesus and, someone to aspire to. I was having a look at your statement for this week for Henley Parish, and in the service of the evangelising mission of the church. So let's have a look at this. Service, the action of helping or doing work for someone. Christian service is not reciprocal, it's a selfless service. Evangelisation, bringing the good news of Jesus into every human, in every situation, can only be accomplished if directly connected to Jesus. Mission, as Margaret told us, being sent, or some of us may experience being pushed or pulled. The church, well, this is a building. 4 walls, a roof. We are the church. You are the church. We are all created equal in the eyes of God. And no individual is any more made in God's image than anyone else. Before God, we are all equal. So I just want to repeat that. No individual is any more made in God's image than anyone else. Before God, we are all equal. We all have a responsibility to respond to our baptismal call. And this is not only our responsibility, but it's our right. It's our right as baptised Christians, not only for our parish mission, for the church's mission, and more importantly, for God's mission. Father Chris Chaplin, MSC. He's originally from Henley Beach. He went to St Michael's College. He joined the Missionaries of the Sacred Heart in 1980. And after ordination to the diaconate, he spent 6 years in Darwin at St Paul's Parish. Then he went on to 3 years in the school retreat ministry, followed by 3 years of a total 12 years that he lived in a solitary contemplative life as a hermit in a hut in New South Wales. From there he went to Fiji and worked in formation of MSC candidates for 6 years, and then came back to Australia to work in St Mary's Towers, the retreat centre, MSC retreat centre at Douglas Park. Then he went back to his eremitical life, his contemplative life, his prayerful life for 9 years. He lived as a hermit again in a hut and prayed and was just one with God. So he was in New South Wales and he was in the Mornington Peninsula. Then in 2017, he was elected to the General Administration of the MSC and moved to Rome, and that's where he is now. So he did mention that he celebrated his dad's funeral here on the 29th of March here at Henley. And he said to say hi to his mum, hi Janet, and who may be watching tonight. So we'll pass you over to the first video of Chris's. Oh my gosh, Janet. Hi Janet. Sorry.
Hi everyone, my name is Chris Chaplin. I'm a missionary of the Sacred Heart and a member of the General Leadership Team in Rome. You've been celebrating the MSC legacy in Adelaide Archdiocese with this series of reflections and remembering Father Frank Perry and Father John Raitt. I have vivid memories of how they were able to give witness to the loving heart of God in very different ways. As Scripture shows us, God works powerfully through human personalities when they're given over to God's ways. I work with members of our congregation in professional and personal development, what we call ongoing formation. Much of that is about learning to be on earth at the heart of God, authentically and faithfully. I'd like to share with you some of the insights we've had regarding heart spirituality. Spirituality of the heart is a way of life based on interiorizing the sentiments of the heart of Jesus. It calls us to a radical living of the gospel with its message of God's love at its very core. We are asked to be the heart of God in the world. If we come into relationship with that heart, we will be changed profoundly. It leads us to desire and give ourselves over to the mission of God's love. It's been said that a healthy church is a missionary church. Much of our experience of church life today in the West is of a church in decline, decreasing numbers and ageing populations, the scourge of clergy sexual abuse, the shortage of clergy and inability to consider alternative approaches to ministry, the influence of secularization, religious indifference, individualism, egoism, and the loss of hope. Unfortunately, too often we settle for managing this decline rather than looking for the vital signs of the Spirit when we consider where God is leading us, especially if that means change. We can meet all sorts of reactions. Change can be painful. It presupposes that we have agreed to make ourselves vulnerable. Naturally, none of us like doing that. Ronald Heifetz of Harvard University's Center for Public Leadership says, research of people having had major heart surgery shows only 20% of patients undertake the recovery regime required for them to return to healthy life again. It seems death is more preferable than change. This helps us understand why systemic transformation is so challenging. In the Life's Healing retreat built on heart spirituality and offered at our retreat centre at Douglas Park near Sydney, there is an understanding that pain isn't the result of change. Rather, it is our resistance to change that makes it painful. A spirituality of the heart enables change through sharing our experience, confirming our missionary energy without denying our difficulties and differences. Studies show that if we acknowledge our resistance to change and admit the main thing that is limiting us is our own attitudes, change happens more easily. A spirituality of the heart isn't just about devotion, warm feelings, or awesome logos. It is a deep, personal transformation that releases us from ourselves and orients us towards God. Just days before the papal conclave that elected him as Pope Francis, Cardinal Bergoglio told the cardinals, "Evangelizing presupposes a desire in the Church to come out of herself. The Church is called to come out of herself and to go to the peripheries, not only geographically, but also to the existential peripheries. The mystery of sin, of pain, of injustice, of ignorance and indifference to religion, of intellectual currents, and of all misery. When the Church does not come out of herself to evangelize, she becomes self-referential and then gets sick. The evils that over time happen in ecclesiastical institutions have their root in self-reference and a kind of theological narcissism. In Revelation, Jesus says that he is at the door and knocks. Obviously, the text refers to his knocking from the outside in order to enter. But I think about the times in which Jesus knocks from within so that we will let him come out. The self-referential church keeps Jesus Christ within herself and does not let him out. When the church is self-referential, inadvertently, she believes she has her own light. She ceases to be the Mysterium Lunae, which means mystery of the moon, or in other words, reflecting the light of Christ the way the moon reflects the light of the sun, and gives way to that very serious evil, spiritual worldliness. It lives to give glory only to one another. Put simply, there are two images of church. Church which evangelizes and comes out of herself, the De Verbum Religiose Audiens et Fidente Proclamans, which means hearing the word of God with reverence and proclaiming it with faith. And the worldly church, living within herself, of herself, for herself. This should shed light on the possible changes and reforms which must be done for the salvation of souls. Thinking of the next Pope, he must be a man who, from the contemplation and adoration of Jesus Christ, helps the Church to go out to the existential peripheries, that helps her to be the fruitful mother who gains life from the sweet and comforting joy of evangelizing. Coming out of ourselves isn't optional. Coming out of ourselves is discipleship. It's the ecstatic nature of the Christian life to go out beyond ourselves, as Jesus did. He's at the door knocking, not in order to join us, but calling us out to join him. Otherwise, it's all on our terms. Being drawn beyond ourselves is the point of conversion, when we finally give ourselves over to God. We are frequently called to the peripheries. We know the experience and how challenging it can be. There are times we know the frustration of encountering in Christian people a great indifference towards the mission that calls us out of our sense of contentment. Father Jules Chevalier, founder of the Missionaries of the Sacred Heart, recognised the egocentrism and religious indifference of his own time, following the anti-religious violence of the French Revolution. He called it the mal moderne, or the modern evils. Pope Francis points to the same reality. It is an example of the self-reference that can be found in both individuals and systems. It is part of human nature. At the individual level, I listen to my own voice. Systemically, the automatic patterns of thinking and behaving are the voices we listen to. One of our MSC confreres from Latin America spoke of a stovetop understanding of religious community. 4 disconnected burners, all burning separately, but not realizing that the gas burning in each is the same for all of them. A spirituality of the heart is not about the community. It is about the gas that is burning in each community. This change of mindset requires a deep conversion or transformation. Old wine splits new wineskins, so we need to find new containers to hold the new spaces opened up by the Spirit. There is a need for a credible living witness to community, not just individualistic witness. A new paradigm is needed, new questions to be asked. What is our identity? Who are we listening to? Who is sending us? This is not a time for a new document, but a time to be an authentic community focused on mission. In Pope Francis's Apostolic Exhortation, Evangelism, we read, "I prefer a church which is bruised, hurting and dirty because it has been out on the streets, rather than a church which is unhealthy from being confined and from clinging to its own security. I do not want a church concerned with being at the centre and which then ends up being caught up in a web of obsessions and procedures. If something should rightly disturb us and trouble our consciences, it is the fact that so many of our brothers and sisters are living without the strength, light and consolation born of friendship with Jesus Christ, without a community of faith to support them, without meaning and a goal in life. More than by fear of going astray, my hope is that we will be moved by the fear of remaining shut up within structures which give us a false sense of security, within rules which make us harsh judges, within habits which make us feel safe, while at our door people are starving And Jesus does not tire of saying to us, give them something to eat. Pope Francis challenges us with his joy, with his smile, with his humour and light-heartedness, with his humanity. He witnesses that proclaiming the gospel should bring great joy to everyone. These are sentiments characteristic of heart spirituality. Francis also stresses that mercy is the first thing the Catholic Church is called to bring to the peripheries. In heart spirituality, we tend to speak of compassion to express the deep empathy God has with us in Jesus. However, the Church uses mercy to express a love that responds to human need in an unexpected or unmerited way. At its core, mercy is forgiveness, and the Scriptures speak frequently of God's love for sinners, that is, for all of us. Pope Francis says, the Church must be a place of mercy, freely given, where everyone can feel welcomed, loved, forgiven, and encouraged to live the good life of the gospel. Pope Francis offers challenging words for the Church and the world of our times. Together with our lived experience, they form a context for us to explore the thinking behind heart spirituality, as well as how to live it. Our questions about the new paradigm also add to the context. What is our identity? Who are we listening to? Who is sending us? What is the purpose of our religious practice? What Christian witness will speak to people in our times? Who are we giving witness to? How does spirituality of the heart help us to understand and practice our faith? What characterises ministry of the heart? In a world full of egocentrism and indifference, how do we go on mission? How do we come out of ourselves to go to the peripheries? How might we fan the flames of our missionary energy? The MSC leadership in Rome has been exploring similar questions for the last few years. We've realised that asking them is more significant to a spirituality of the heart than having the answers. Furthermore, every person brings with them their own questions, and as we share our stories in the context of these questions of ours, our faith becomes more focused through our mutual exchange. In the next sections, we'll explore the thinking behind a spirituality of the heart and look at what it means to live it.
So I don't know anybody who says, oh, I love change. Don't know anybody. So by its nature, change makes us vulnerable, and vulnerability invites us to step into the unknown. And there's one thing I've learnt is that God won't put us anywhere, or won't put you anywhere that he's not going to travel with you. So last night I shared a little bit of my mission story, but I just wanted to expand on that. When I was approached to work on the pastoral care team at Calvary, I laughed. I literally laughed at God. I said, how can I support patients and their families through the most difficult times in their lives? And I was absolutely sure that I'd be the one rocking in the corner, because there's no way that I thought I could do that. And I said no, but God was persistent. So eventually I gave in and I said, okay, if you want me to do this, then you better come down and be with me here. So as you know, as I know now, it's an absolute privilege to journey with patients and families in their darkest time. But I realise it's not my mission, it's God's mission, and I'm just simply a vessel. So back to Chris's question. So I loved when Chris shared the gospel story of Jesus knocking, and he said, it's not only knocking from the outside to come in, but knocking from within to come out. Like Jesus is calling us to go out. But if you're like me, I guess that knocking might need to come with a sledgehammer as well, because, you just, need a little bit of encouragement. So as we go into the small break, I'd like you to ponder Chris's 3 questions. I'm not going to go through all of them, but just the first 3. So what is our identity? Who are we listening to? And who is sending us? So what is our identity? Who are we listening to? And who is sending us? So we're just going to have a small break before the second video starts.
In Jesus, God's love is embodied in a human heart. God's relationship with us calls us to orient our lives according to how the Spirit of God is guiding us. This begins with the renewal of our own hearts. We can only take on new directions and new ways of thinking when our hearts are growing and opened to renewal. What often happens is that we are pressured or convinced into what is new, and we have clear evidence that doing this simply results in superficial conformity rather than a true interiorization of the gospel values. Any authentic approach to mission must be founded on the deepest possible conversion of the whole person and not passing fads, emotional sweeteners, or exclusively academic interest. Only hearts renewed by the compassion of Christ can envision a society in which justice dwells. Hence, MSC Ministry and Mission works to create a new heart for a new world. To bring forth a new heart for a new world, we have first to come to contemplate Christ in our own hearts, listen to Christ in the heart of the world, and listen to Christ in the deep longings of our time. We have to find a way to live our lives from within the heart of Christ. Our former MSC Superior General and later an auxiliary bishop in Brisbane, Father Jim Cuskelly, made important contributions to our understanding of a spirituality of the heart. In the first place, he defined the meaning of the word spirituality as distinct from devotional practice. We may be very dedicated to fulfilling all the requirements of particular devotions. However, when we speak of spirituality, we refer to the central intuition of a person's prayer, so influencing a person's life that the special light it brings transforms the whole of the person's life. Cuskelly gave an outline of how he saw spirituality of the heart, describing it as a religion that has become interiorized and habitual. Let us remember also the meaning of religion. Re ligio, to be bound again, back to God in the most wholesome sense possible. We have to go down to the depths of our own souls in a realization of our profound personal needs of life, of love, and of meaning. We must find, through faith and reflection, the answer to our own questioning in the heart of Christ. That is, in the depths of his personality, where humanity's yearning and God's graciousness meet in redemptive incarnation. Then, fashioned by these forces, our own heart will be an understanding heart, open to, feeling for, and giving to our sisters and brothers in Christ. We will not be discouraged in the face of difficulties. In fact, we will see difficulties as opportunities offered to us by God to trust in his love at work in any situation. We will follow Christ, who loved with a human heart, as Vatican II reminded us. He shared our humanity that we might know that over us all is the everlasting love of the Father. In God's good time, the omnipotent love of God will have its way. It is this love in which we have learned to believe. And the letter to the Philippians reminds us, make your own the mind of Christ Jesus, who, being in the form of God, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself, taking the form of a slave, being, as human beings are, and being in every way like a human being, he was humbler yet, even to accepting death upon a cross. The former MSC Assistant General and Australian Provincial, Father Dennis Murphy, later wrote, "When Jesus began to preach, he called for conversion, for a change of heart. He continues to do the same today. His call for a change of heart is based on God's coming to us as a Father who loves us. This love is not only revealed in the words and actions of Jesus, but particularly in his own deepest attitudes and values, that is, in his heart." These two movements of revelation and conversion take place in the heart of an individual, but of necessity they go beyond the individual too, for they change relationships between people and hence should create a new form of society. Thus, there is a third movement in the teaching of Jesus, mission into the heart of the world. When we look at the movement of revelation, we can see two parts: the encounter and the relationship. Thus, we can build on Murphy's thoughts and identify four movements within a spirituality of the heart: encounter, intimacy, conversion, and mission. These movements show us a new way of being in the world, different to the problem-solving mindset that dominates our approach to things. Let us look closer at these four movements. Sometimes we're touched by reality in such a way we're caused to stop and say, "Hold on, what's going on here?" In other words, to appreciate what is. If this encounter goes deeper, a relationship forms in which I notice my freedom in love and also the limitations in myself that hold me back. Imagine what could be if I went with this. This is a time of new and exciting vision. As relationships deepen, they call for growth. We let go unfreedoms and work on staying in love. I recognise that building love is what I should do, even when it's hard. God builds this new future with us. True love can't be hidden. It has an impetus to be shared. We grow in confidence with the affirmation of being loved. We know we can love others freely and responsibly because we are loved first. This experience of being loved sustains us beyond our fear, and it sends us out into new encounters. These movements don't take place in a linear fashion. Rather, each implies the other as they continually interact. Heart spirituality helps us to come into relationship with the mystery in life, understand the context of the realities we experience, and helps us to discern how God is directing us. There are movements of encounter when the experience of God's love breaks through to us, for example, or when we are confronted by the need for change in our lives, or at the sight of suffering, or profound joy, or when creation stirs deep emotions in us. Through the chance encounters of each moment, Opportunities are present to be aware of God's unconditional love in the realities of my life. I realise God loves others in the same way. God's love beckons me, even when I don't apprehend his voice. I filter these encounters through my already pre-existing dispositions, disregard them, misinterpret them, or doubt myself in them. Yet, love makes itself known to us unexpectedly again and again, in the fleeting moments of attraction that the Jesuit scientist Pierre Teilhard de Chardin called allurement. I am left with an invitation. I'm free to follow. I'm free to ignore it. I'm free to go on with life as normal. Or am I? It's one thing to encounter such experiences. Something more happens when I wait with them. They begin to take root, they begin to take shape and influence how I see things, live my life, and influence the choices I make. This influence is a result of a growing intimacy between myself and the object of my experience. The deeper I relate with God, for example, the more God reveals to me about God, the more I come to know who I really am, the more I get glimpses of the mystery that is God in my reality. There are daily, moment by moment, times of encounter in the lives of all of us, but some really stand out. The story of Moses and the burning bush begins with a glimpse of mystery. The bush is burning but not consumed. Moses is attracted to it. Love is both sacred and scary. It scares us, but we won't get destroyed by it. To stand before the fire of love requires me to be at home with myself, because in the light of that fire I see my true self rather than the masks society expects me to wear. This is at the heart of authentic intimacy and conversion, a foundation on which healthy growth and transformation can take place. This encounter with the sacred changes Moses' life, and he brings freedom to God's people. Encounter, intimacy, conversion, mission. In intimacy, we meet our vulnerability. We meet our woundedness. But that is also exactly where we meet God. St. Augustine famously said, "God is more intimate to me than I am to myself." And he greatly feared intimacy. But God got around that. It's okay because the gaze of God receives me exactly as I am. Love gains strength. There are many false starts and times of doubt, but trust and faithfulness grow. Mutual love is a participation in a greater love to which it points. Love, by its very nature, demands we change. Like a fuller's fire, it burns away the dross. Love is not content to leave what is unloving within us. The word conversion has many negative overtones. Some people often prefer to speak of transformation. Some even use the word evolution in the sense of moving beyond an old form that was less sustainable, less life-giving. As Christians, we might speak of resurrection, which is something we all want in some way. Jesus' resurrection is a potent, focused and compelling statement about what God is still and forever doing with us. God appears to be resurrecting everything, all the time, and everywhere. Resurrection is the consequence of intimacy. Archbishop Oscar Romero said that he had not undergone a conversion, but an evolution of faith. He was asked if he was afraid that he would be killed as many others around him. He admitted that while he did have a prudent concern about threats to his life, fear didn't stop him. He said God was with him, and if something happened to him, then he was prepared. His words, God was with him, says to us that there was an intimacy that sustained him and changed him. In earlier days, his fear controlled him and kept him silent. But then when he saw his priests and people being tortured and killed, God's presence meant he could transcend himself and step forward for the good of those suffering. This evolution or conversion to God expands us beyond self-interest. Doing so releases the energy, passion, and joy needed to give inertia to undertake God's mission in the world. The mutuality of intimacy demands vulnerability. Vulnerability in intimacy invites us to step often into the unknown. The old small self, now more capable of embracing a bigger story, impels us to go out of ourselves to the peripheries. This is mission. Our icon of this openness is the Sacred Heart, who draws us to imitate the extent of his charity for all, dying to give life, creating a new world and a new heart. Jules Chevalier in 1900 said, "The Word, coming from the heart of his Father, made the world emerge from nothing, and from the heart of the incarnate Word, pierced on Calvary, I see a new world emerging, the world of those he has chosen. And this creation, so fertile, full of grandeur, and inspired by love and mercy, is the Church, the mystical body of Christ, which makes this new creation present on earth until the end of time." So, these 4 simple movements describe a powerful journey. We call it heart spirituality. They describe a process that shifts our perspective and broadens our worldview, freeing us from ourselves for the sake of God's mission. We're moved from an ego-centered perspective to one that is self-transcending and God-centered. We fall more deeply in love with God. Our lives become more grateful and joyful. Heart spirituality, whose beginnings are found in the contemplation of the heart of Christ, leads us to the energy to go out to the peripheries. I finish with these words of Chevalier. When God wants something done, obstacles for him are means. He makes sport of human wisdom, upsets its expectations, calls to life what, in its view, should never see the light of day. He gives growth, strength, and fruitfulness to what human wisdom has condemned to death. The foundation and growth of the little society of the Missionaries of the Sacred Heart is proof of this truth.
Gee whiz, Chris. So much in there to unpack. I'm just going to grab a couple of pearls of wisdom that I found. So this renewal of the heart, it's what Father Philip was talking about on Monday night. This metanoia, the total revolution of the heart. This renewal of the heart, it requires an open heart, which requires an open mind, because we're physical, spiritual and emotional beings. So open mind, open heart. But how do we open our hearts when they're encased by the wall that we've built to protect us or to protect our hearts? So we all know the story about the chicken and the egg. But, well, God loves you first. God knows us better than we know ourselves. But he loves us unconditionally, again and again and again, despite our mistakes, notwithstanding our faults. And Archbishop Patrick spoke on Tuesday night about the abundant mercy of God. Now, Chris mentioned then, when we face our woundedness and our vulnerability in intimacy, this is exactly where we meet God. So as we take a small break and a stretch and a wriggle, I'd like to invite you to think about what are the walls, the cages that you've built, not asking you to answer, but just, contemplate. What are those cages that have encased your heart and prevent you from truly letting God in?
said something about heart spirituality, but what does it mean in practice? Good question, because heart spirituality is known when it is lived, not just some nice thoughts. That is why it's part of an incarnational spirituality. You'll be living a spirituality of the heart when you walk the talk. When all your talk about the love of God is what you practice in your life. Now we get to the challenging bit. And I'd like to use one simple practice that we can all get into. It's called listening. How many times do we hear Jesus calling the disciples to listen? How good are you at listening? Listening is at the centre of heart spirituality, particularly the capacity to listen to the heart of Jesus. But here's the catch. We hear his voice frequently through the voice of others. Remember the gospel? If you can't love your sister or brother who you can see, how can you love God who you have never seen? So, let's be realistic. Living a heart spirituality can be incredibly challenging. However, it is also a profound remedy for a world that has stopped listening. The MSC General Leadership Team has been developing a practice of listening over the last 3 years called accompaniment. It's a journeying with, a companioning, a walking together, an engagement in allowing another to tell their story. Accompaniment into the complex reality of life is characteristic of a spirituality of the heart. Jesus, joining the disciples on the road to Emmaus after the resurrection, is a story about accompaniment. He walks with them and he inquires what's going on. They start telling him the whole story about what happened to their friend and Master Jesus, and can't believe he hasn't heard the story. He just says, "What things?" By doing so, he allows them to tell the story from their perspective. How often do we usually do that? A few words in and we take over and we say, "Oh yeah, I know that." Or we say, "No, you got that wrong. It was like this." Or we say, "Oh yeah, that happened to me." And we tell a different story that was similar, but we have now become the focus of the story that we're telling. Jesus lets them tell their story first. It's only after listening to their story, he teaches them how to see their story from within the context of the scriptures and the prophets, so that they can understand what God was doing through all these events of recent days in Jerusalem. Now that's accompaniment. It's only later they even realise who it was who was talking to them, when he breaks the bread with them in that signature action they could not miss. His accompaniment of them is never about himself, but always about proclaiming the amazing goodness of God. Accompaniment is a non-judgmental process of listening and empathising. Good accompaniment enables us to sense we are fully accepted and that we have a sense of God's love for us. This promotes an awareness of self, other, and God, and it leads to an acceptance and affirmation of the realities in a person's life. Accompaniment is a listening to and reflecting back of hopes and desires in the light and the hope and the desires of the faith community. It builds relationships using a personal, relational approach that leads to openness, trust, and in living the culture of the gospel. Deborah Tannen, author and professor of linguistics at Georgetown University, says, "To say that a person feels listened to means a lot more than just their ideas get heard. It's a sign of respect. It makes people feel valued." To explore a spirituality of the heart using the practice of listening as an example, I suggest we try the schema found in the process called Theory U by a man called Otto Scharmer. His material is brilliant. His model parallels the four movements of our own heart spirituality. We put the four movements on this diagram in such a way to represent the journey down into the heart of Christ through encounter and intimacy, to the conversion that takes place when we live from within his heart, and the outward arc of mission that flows from it. We can see the U-shape of deeper inquiry that moves through four dimensions of listening, which Scharmer calls downloading, factual listening, empathic listening, and generative listening. I am only going to refer to these aspects of his theory briefly and use them to help us to understand what it looks like to live from the heart of Christ. The first dimension of listening is downloading. It is what we recognize as the movement in the spirituality of the heart referred to as encounter. It is a process of listening from habits, reconfirming what I already know, and seeking out what confirms me in my prevailing belief systems. I listen to God, to the other, and to self, but through my own mind and thoughts and my own habitual perceptions and judgments, so that my responses have more to do with what I expect to hear than with what is actually being said. Perhaps this image helps. There is little space to receive much from you outside my own perceptions and judgments, because I'm already full. I am the reference point of my listening world. A self-referential Christian, a self-referential church. Nothing new penetrates the bubble. The story of the call of Samuel is a good example of downloading. The Lord called, "Samuel, Samuel," and he said, "Here I am," and ran to Eli and said, "Here I am, for you called me." But he said, "I did not call. Lie down again." Samuel repeats this 3 times. He hears, but he doesn't listen. He hears only what he knows. In the second dimension of listening, we begin to engage in intimacy. We let the data talk to us, and we notice disconfirming information. Instead of listening through my habitual judgments, I suspend them and keep an open mind to the facts that may not align with my own thoughts and that may even challenge my prevailing beliefs. Imagine two people from different faith traditions listening to one another in an open and interested way. They hear doctrines that they do not personally believe in, but refrain from holding the other in judgment. The connection that happens through an open mind makes space within our thinking and opens our curiosity. In this image, we see that we make space in ourselves by opening our minds to the facts that the other are bringing, rather than staying with my own assumptions. The factor that most disconnects us from having an open mind and limits our capacity to hear the facts another is presenting is the voice of judgment within us. This voice of judgment takes the listener back to the previous dimension of downloading, in which he or she filters the facts through his or her own habitual judgments. The third dimension is empathic listening. This is the movement of the heart in which a moral and religious conversion is enabled, because we see the situation through the eyes of another. This dimension connects the listener to the emotional communication, both of herself or himself, and the other, she or he, that they are listening to. This is listening from within the depths of the human person to the story behind the facts, the body language, the tone, the unsaid statements that are intimated but verbally unexpressed. Doing this requires an open heart, using our feelings and our heart to tune into another person's point of view. This open heart enables an emotional connection, which draws one into a deeper respect, compassion, and reverence. Here, we are more available to the mystery of God's love and the sacred space created in the relationship. We begin to change and allow God and other more space in our lives. In this image, we see that it is not about making space for your facts in my mind, but I hold you as a person with an open heart. I can hold what you are holding with you without judgment or cynicism of you. I let you be what you are, and I don't try to correct or change you. The disconnection at this level is the result of the voice of cynicism within us, which reveals the filter of mistrust and hurt through which listening is taking place. Sharma calls this fourth dimension generative listening. We go to what he calls the source and listen for the highest future possible to show up while holding a space for something new to be born. The generative outflow of listening enables a connection beyond the individual. For us, as Christians, this transcendence of ourself is our coming into the heart of Christ, together in communal discernment. And we recognise the outflowing as the heart movement of mission. It is a movement of transcendence, resulting from mutually explored depth, bringing us to a higher level of discernment. In the heart of Christ, we connect to the emerging whole of God's unconditional love for the world and the direction that gives to our communal lives. We recognise this direction we have discerned together as the will of God, wanting for us a life lived completely in the embrace of his heart. A shift in identity takes place in us, a shift towards a more authentic us. It is in the heart of Christ we discover our true nature, and what is false is less able to stand in the light that shines there. This level of listening or connection requires of us an open will. We grow into willingness to trust that God is directing all our efforts towards goodness and completeness, despite not knowing where God might be taking us. It is a surrender into the benevolence of the heart of Christ, a letting go. In this image of generative listening, we see the former image of you with an open heart, holding the other, holding what you're both holding. But the difference in this image is that both you and the other and what we are all holding is held in the heart of Christ. We, with all that we are holding, have an open will. We are willing to go to vulnerable places together because we are held by the heart of Christ that holds all possibilities. The voice of fear is the disconnecting force that restricts this movement. It disconnects us from the trust needed to engage with the mysterious action of God's Spirit. When we move past our fears, we begin the letting go that is needed for us to enter with trust into the heart of Christ. This is a movement in which we find in ourselves a willing vulnerability. We have spoken of the movement of mission as the outflowing of life, of energy, of purpose, commitment, activity, ministry, that comes from a deep connection to the source of all life we find in the heart of Christ. This is enabled because we have become willing to move with where or how the heart of Christ is leading us. Mission can be seen as letting come. We often associate mission with our activity, what we do, what ministries we decide to undertake. If, however, the source of our mission is the heart of Christ, then an authentic sense of mission requires that what we do finds its origins in obedience, the Latin root of which is ob audiens, meaning to listen carefully. Letting come is a process of co-creation. Envisioning flows from our communal listening to the heart of Christ rather than from our small individual selves. As we embody what we have heard in the heart of Christ, our practices, our behaviours, our attitudes evolve, and the embodying happens from a context of a larger ecosystem. The prefix eco refers to the environment or the place in which we live, moving beyond I, you, and even the institutional us to communion in the heart of Christ. Brings a greater freedom, a focus and energy to serve the mission. We move together from an ego system to an ecosystem.
So at the door we've got pictures of that diagram, and before we're going to let you out, we just need you to label that before you go. So, just kidding. Okay, so there's clearly a lot. There's clearly a lot in that video, and I think this is just the beginning. We've got a lot to think about. Back to the beginning, I'd just like to say, heart spirituality is a work in progress, as Chris said, a journey in action. And just from then, a couple of pearls of wisdom. Heart spirituality involves listening, so authentic listening to the other, listening to God, and listening to yourself. And this requires intentional space, so that's space both mentally and physically. Not always an easy thing to do. And one of Father Philip's rules on Monday of the kingdom that he was talking about, the rules of the kingdom, and he was one of the, I think it was rule 1, that we recognise God in everything and everyone all the time. So this is not easy because, in my practice I know there are weeds everywhere, and heart spirituality asks us to see God in those weeds, because those weeds are too a gift from God, and they too have a purpose in God's mission. So to finish up, I read somewhere, and I'm not sure if the first bit of this is right, but it was, without God, things are impossible. With God, all things are possible, and for nothing is impossible with God. So I think if we have any questions, I reckon it wasn't in my contract to answer, so Paul. I don't know if there are any questions. I think we've got a mic.
Thanks, Narita. Now, who's got the first question? There are so many questions that come up in this conversion, really, of another world, another way of looking at each other, another way of relating to each other, and more importantly, another way of relating to the church. The church has got all sorts of rules. Well, we've seen another display of not rules, but ideals, images, ways of behaving, ways of acting that we can all relate to, but putting it all together, that's the challenge that we've got. But we're able to do it. Not because we can do it, but because, as Narita said, and Philip said on Monday, God is within us. God loves us ultimately and utterly to support and care for us in the struggle of being a human being that loves not only God, but loves everyone else too. And that's why it's so hard. If we didn't have to love everyone else, well, we'd be able to, no, I love you, no, forget about that. That's not what it's about. And we don't know how to deal with it in our world today, because our world's so totally different in not even following the rules of the 1950s or 1800s or back in the Middle Ages or even back in the time of Jesus. We're not talking about rules, we're talking about human beings created by God to bring God's love and presence to everyone around them. Now, if that's not a big ideal, I don't know what would be, but that's what it is. But what does it do? It opens our hearts to each other. It opens our hearts particularly to the people who need our care and our love. So, any questions? This is mainly for the people that are watching us.
Sorry, just a comment really. The 3 points that Chris made so beautifully of the disconnection points are being stuck on the factual, are being stuck on cynicism, or being blocked by fear. To hear each of those clearly identified as the roadblocks, I think it really helps understand the way through a bit better. Because throughout our lives, throughout my life anyway, of course I can be stuck in any of them, but I'm also hit by those. I hit roadblocks that others make of being stuck with the facts, stuck on the being a bit cynical, or being fearful of being open to change when change is required. And I see that in our church very much as well. And I think it's so refreshing to hear somebody like Chris articulate them and just pinpoint those 3 things that, as a human, I know I fail, but also to know that our church fails as well. And of course our church is human, that's why it fails. But I just found that really, really refreshing amongst all of the other stuff that he said, which was very inspiring. But those 3 little stumbling points really helped me to know, okay, I have to know when those are happening in me. It's really worthwhile.
And I think those 3 little stumbling blocks, we probably, all of us, have 1 or 2 that we've identified. And I suppose that's the privilege that Chris has given us tonight, to identify a little bit more about ourselves and God's presence in our lives, and what we can do to allow God's presence to be more fully alive in us. Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, Chris spoke about sharing your story, which I think is really important. You know, we come together as a community, but I know Father Paul has been asking, I've been watching on, Facebook, online mass, and getting people to talk, say how their week's been or what's happening. Someone could be sick in their family, and if people don't talk and share their story, well, we don't know what's behind that person, what's going on inside them. So to me, that really speaks about having that opportunity to share our story. And he spoke about having a companion to do that with, not to gossip, but to be a real friend and share with all those unconditional love and listening and openness. And I think there's really something in there. I feel that anyway.
Thank you.
Just something to add, that someone said to me once, the difference between a stranger and a friend is a story.
The task, what is our task now? That, to me, that sort of comes up all the time. Sorry? To listen. To listen.
The thing that came out to me is we really need to listen with our hearts. We're not listening with our hearts. It's about listening with our heart.
So it's different, isn't it? Listening not to understand, but to feel.
That's the heart spirituality, is heart speaking to heart.
Heart speaking to heart.
He said that to me when he was 17. He came back from studying and was all excited. He talked about heart speaking to heart, listening with the heart quietly and not putting your bit in, you know? Yeah.
He gave us some examples, didn't he, in this talk about what we do. When someone says, oh, this is how I'm feeling about this. Oh, yeah, I know that. I was like that too yesterday. And those sorts of things, we automatically fall into those sorts of traps, I suppose they're called, because we're not sure of ourselves in a way. One of the key aspects of listening is stepping back from confronting someone, stepping back to observe, to see how are they feeling. We can see how they're feeling, we can feel how they're feeling, and then we can listen much more closely about what's happening, rather than trying to work it out. No, you don't have to work it out.
My comment is that we have a lot more time to listen as we grow older because we don't have so many pressures on us. So heart spirituality is something that becomes a lot easier, I believe, as we mature.
Thank you. I look forward to that. Well, it's 8:30, so I thank everyone very much for coming tonight, for coming through the week, and hopefully we'll be able to reproduce this sort of environment again, perhaps not as on the lavish scale that we've tried to do at this time, and I think, James, thank you. It's I think it was for, is Noreen here? No. Oh, Noreen. How many people watched this stuff on Friday, on Saturday, Tuesday? 600 or something? Yeah. So it's not just us that's involved in this, and thanks to everyone that I can see through that little hole. Wherever you are, thanks for being with us, and we hope to continue somehow or other to sort of be open and listen to the world in which we are in, so that bowl that first bowl that was full up, we allow some of the fluff to fly out and allow someone else's experience and place in life to come into our hearts that way. And eventually Christ will hold us up. Before I go, I'd like to thank Janet for coming. Yeah. Without you, we wouldn't be here. So thank you, Janet. And thanks everyone for being here tonight.